I'm starting to hear this distinction between AI versus AI utility, tools that help us versus just things that are trying to replace us. Things like the new denoise tool in DaVinci Resolve, Magic Mask, none of those things are going to replace us because they're tools that need to still be used. In that sense, I am very hopeful. I used AI to write a bit of code for me once. I just didn't know how to run it properly. I still needed to learn how to QC it, and how to write the right headers for it. And you still need developers to do all that stuff. Not just me, but many people before me have said that AI is just about wielding the tool correctly. And you can wield it well or you can, wield it poorly. So it really comes down to the user.
Welcome to Color and Coffee, a podcast that's focused on the craft of color and the artist behind it. I'm your host, Jason Bowdacious. And each episode, we'll sit down with some of the most talented artists in the industry and have a casual chat from one artist to another. We'll share their stories, their insights, their tips, and of course, their beverage of choice. Whether you're a seasoned pro or just getting started, join us for some great color discussion. Sit back, grab your mug. You're listening to Color and Coffee. Welcome to Color and Coffee. Today I have a really special guest. It is Daria Fissoun. She is a colorist, she is a compositor, and she is a certified DaVinci Resolve trainer. Welcome to the show, Daria.
Thank you for having me, Jason.
So, first and most importantly, what are you drinking today?
I am drinking instant coffee from my best auntie mug.
As I proceed to spill coffee on myself out of partial shock, tell me about this instant coffee mix of yours. I think you may be one of the first guests on the show to do instant coffee. So
I don't have what you would call a sophisticated palate. I genuinely cannot tell instant from the best of the best. So I figure why not go for, the more affordable option. I only started drinking coffee when I visited the US, actually. I was strictly a tea drinker up until then.
Really? When was the first time you visited the US?
It was actually only a few years ago because it was when I wrote the first Colorist guide for Blackmagic. And we started running these beta workshops, to test, to QC it basically. And that's where I met Mark Whalage and all those guys. And I was at the Blackmagic Burbank office. So that was my first trip was probably 2000, I want to say 18, something like that.
I understand the need for coffee, writing the Colorist guide. That would absolutely inspire the desire to start drinking coffee. So that makes sense. Just getting into the coffee palette, getting into instant coffee, totally understand. This morning, I'm drinking a new mix of vanilla. I'm drinking a vanilla latte made with breezy or beans. I'm trying to expand my palate a little bit. I'll admit my coffee palate is a little bit basic myself. That's what we're going to be driving our conversation with today. So we're going to jump into our conversation. Daria, first and foremost, I need to tell you that your manuals and the Colorist guide live in my Dropbox. I have every single version of them because they are such important guides and I reference them on a regular basis. So I usually start with, how did you get into this? But to be honest, you're a little bit different. So I want to ask, what got you into writing the DaVinci Resolve manual? Being a colorist is niche, but writing the manual is the niche of niche.
Yeah, it was it was a really weird entry point, and I feel almost like I got hoodwinked into it because I didn't realize I was doing it until I was probably 4 chapters in. So I'll explain. I pretty much have to go back to why I learned DaVinci Resolve in the first place. Because I started off color grading and I think I was using probably Final Cut 7. I did an entire feature in Final Cut 7, believe it or not. After that, I think it was Adobe, and I'm doing this more and more, more people are hiring me, less for compositing and more for coloring exclusively. So I started looking into dedicated applications. I went through Apple Color and a SpeedGrade, and eventually found DaVinci Resolve. Loved it. I was wow, why is no one talking about this? This is nowhere. Yeah, this would have been about on version 11, I think. So there's they had just introduced the edit page, for example. It was a really early iteration of it. So pre-Fairlight, pre-Fusion, everything. As I was doing that and working professionally, I was also doing training at a media college in London. Every time students had post-production questions in the Adobe suite, it was pretty easy to just find a link on YouTube and go here, watch this video. That's the process that you need to know. But for DaVinci Resolve, there was nothing. So I eventually just started recording these 5-minute little mini tutorials just so that, I would save myself time responding to student inquiries. People just started finding the videos and subscribing. And after about a year, after I'd done around 100 videos, Blackmagic reached out. And that was really surprising because It's not something I had anticipated. And they were super nice, you know, they wrote and they were like, yeah, do you want to come to like this beta like workshop that we're running in like London next week? And I was like, cool, yeah.
And you're based out of London, correct?
I am based in
Okay.
London, yeah. Patty Mantisian was there. She was running the training department at the time. I did like a sort of a demo presentation at the end of class, like had a lot of fun. Wrote and said like, can you contribute a chapter to like the beginner's guide that we're currently developing? And I was like, oh my God, like, oh, you know, I was like really flustered and all that. But like, yeah,
Pressure's on, right?
oh, yeah, 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 for sure. Because I'd never been like associated with a company like of that size. So yeah, I wrote a chapter. It seemed to go quite well. They were pleased. So then they were like, hey, we're also going to be doing specialist books as well, you know, for all the other pages. Think you could maybe like cover like just the intro chapter for the color book? Well, as long as it's just the intro. So I just write one chapter and then they're like, can you like, you know, we're going to do like a 3-part series in the book. Like, can you just do like maybe round up the first part? And like, no joke, like I was pretty much on like chapter 4 by the time it dawned on me. I'm like, I think they basically are getting me to write the book without telling me that they want the whole book. And there must have been a reason why they went about it that way, because I think that kind of lulled me into like this confidence, I guess, because I thought like, well, I'm just doing the intro chapter, no biggie, you know. And then the book actually took about 2 years, because after I realized it was the whole thing, I went back and restructured it, because I'm like, well, if I had known about it as a bigger project, I would have made it more cohesive in this way. So it was actually quite good. It was a lot of like trial and error and a lot of like really helpful communication with like top industry colorists really led the way as well.
And it's worth mentioning that you can download this book for free on Blackmagic's website, correct?
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
And we'll have that link in the show notes as well. It's a really, really useful guide. Now, I think that's pretty interesting. A lot of people talk about writing a book and sort of spin their wheels on that forever. You went about this sort of the opposite way, where you're sort of writing piecemeal of it. And then while you're sort of halfway pregnant with it, you went back and did sort of a reorganization of it, which actually I think is probably the best way of going about it, almost an MVP way about it. I want to take one moment to acknowledge something that I think is interesting when you tell me the story about it, because I'm hearing you describe what is clearly an instance of scope creep in this project. But in terms of color grading, that may be a negative thing. But in terms of writing a technical manual, this may be a positive way of going about it because of the overwhelm.
Oh, I agree. It's an interesting term, actually, scope creep. Is I assume you're describing like a project that you don't anticipate will be as big as it eventually becomes.
Yeah, I mean, this is not just limited to our industry. This concept of it could be an app development, it could be a software development, it could be in color grading, in terms of it starts off as one type of project and all of a sudden you have another part of the project creeping in. All of a sudden delivery creeps in. All of a sudden you need a DCP, and it's just all of a sudden it started as project A and now it's a project Z. And that's the idea of scope creep.
Yeah, no, it's a really interesting term. I'm glad to know the name for it now, because I feel it happens to me a lot.
Yeah, I think it happens all the time.
Yeah.
But what's interesting, and one of the questions I want to ask you is, what did you feel once you found out about, like, okay, I'm going to go and do the whole manual? What were some of your thoughts and what were some of your goals? Because honestly, as a colorist, that's an overwhelming thing. And what is some of the main takeaways that you wanted colorists to walk away with after reading that guide?
One of the biggest challenges is like understanding the audience that's going through the manual, right? Because you're going to have people who just found out what color grading is as a job like 2 days ago. And then you're going to have people who have been working it like with telecines, you know, and they've come from like broadcast. So how do you satisfy both camps? So that's part of the reason why I rewrote the book, is because I was like, okay, I need to pretty much like every part of the book has to be a different starting point as you progress professionally, which is why the first, you know, part 1 is just like, it's not self-contained, but it's an archive project, which is the easiest thing to open. It's already color managed, so it is like display referred basically. And I'm like, this is pretty good for a beginner, because that's what you're going to be doing if you're just uploading stuff off your phone and you're playing around with the colors a bit. It's a good time to understand the fundamentals, you know. And then the second one is the more like industry approach with XMLs, you know, and that you started like that. And then it finishes with even more advanced concept, more affecting the image, like optics and things like that. In the end, like when we run the workshops live and we get those opinion polls at the end, usually the result is like 90% are happy with the overall class. And then there's about 5% that say that it was too basic, and about 5% that say that it was too advanced. And that's kind of where we want to be, like get like the overall majority satisfied. But you're never going to get 100%. So, you know. try my best.
Yeah, that almost suggests that those, I call those outliers needed to either go for a more basic class or a more advanced class. You offer those, then you're essentially giving them a place to go. I want to take a slight detour and talk about your YouTube channel, A Goat's Eye, which some people may be familiar with, but recently renamed to DaVinci Master Key.
Yeah, so it was Goat's Eye View originally, and I thought like about a year ago, I was like, oh, I think I have more time again to make videos, so I was like, I'll do a rebrand, make it more flashy, and I did like about one video, and I've been busy since, so I've not been able to come back.
You are not the only one that has had that thought. I'm sure myself and many others have tried to make a little bit more of an effort for YouTube and has had the thought but not put the actual work in. So no problem. But I'm sure we'll be seeing more videos from that soon. One question I wanted to ask you, and I'm sure many have had this question, where did A Goat's Eye View come from, that title?
At the time, I just thought it was a bit funny, but it was kind of two film references in one. If you look at the eye of a goat, their pupils are horizontal. I was always kind of like tickled by the idea that they're always seeing in cinemascope, or cinescope, because they have like for evolutionary purposes, like extra wide visions, so they could protect themselves. But then the other half of it is, we were learning like framing techniques in film school. And I was just like, oh, so like, you have bird's eye view from the top and you have worm's eye view from the bottom. So I guess goat's eye would be like somewhere around mid-level.
That's so funny.
I came up with a name and I was just like, well, that's funny. That's like a few references to film. And then everybody just asks like, what does this even mean? I was like, oof. But whatever. It's kind of cutesy anyway.
Now you have it. It's officially documented on this podcast. And if anybody asks, you can just push them right here and it's officially right on here. You can say, this is where I've told exactly where this title came from. And I think it's a fantastic title now that I know where it came from. And that's the history of it. Now it's DaVinci Master Key, which perfectly explains what it is and what you're going to learn there.
Yeah, it was a bit of an alliteration, just kind of rhymes.
I think those type of names for communities are pretty funny in the sense of not knowing what it is and then obviously finding the background of it. I think that's a really, really sort of unique and funny reference to it. Plus, it's highly memorable. I don't think there's any other channels that I've ever confused yours with.
Yeah.
I want to ask a little bit more about your in-person training because you are one of the more well-known Blackmagic certified trainers. And I want to ask about the in-person training and the sort of online training. If I wanted to learn a little bit more about DaVinci Resolve and I wanted to sign up for your courses, where can I learn more about that? I know you do on Blackmagic. I know you do on Mixing Light, but they don't repeat. And I think one of my interesting questions is there a reason for that? Is that a decision that was chosen purposefully? Like why they don't host them on YouTube, for instance, after they do the live trainings?
Oh, that's a really good question. I think the answer might be like a bit corporate because that was like one of the stipulations is like, yeah, what you have to understand about the training team with Blackmagic, it's like, they are like a ragtag team. It's a pretty small outfit and it's pretty much driven by like passion and enthusiasm by the trainers. And they kind of let us get away with like a lot of things, so like developing the training materials, we have a lot of control over that, like us, the authors. That really surprised me when I first came around, when they asked me to write like a chapter or develop the book eventually. I assumed that there would be a table of contents that I would have to follow or that a list of topics I'd have to cover. There was nothing. There was not even the slightest direction or specification. Like I was just by myself. And the head trainer at the time was just like, or the head of the department was like, you're the expert. You tell us what the book should be about. And I was like, whoa, and I can say that for the other trainers, for the other authors as well. So with the classes as well, like they're really fun and very fluid. We just run them, we're very casual. There's no again, any communication or direction from corporate. One thing that we've kind of maybe gleaned from the head of the training department is that because there's this like lack of maybe corporate control or official language, they maybe don't want it to exist as a recorded entity that could end up being like quoted or miscommunicate something about marketing. I assume that's why they're live only. It also means that they get to be a bit more fluid. So as you know, there's like a new build of Resolve like every 21 days or something crazy like that. So I could be in the middle of teaching, I'll be presenting a topic and I'll be like, okay, well, click in the options to find this tool. And then I'll realize it's not there anymore. And I'm like, okay, well, where is it? And I have to look around the page and go like, oh, they've moved it again, to this other place, which, if you're watching recordings, they're going to be obsolete within 6 months or probably less.
I could see how that makes sense. I'm based in LA, you're based in London. These are both sort of major post centers or arteries. I've heard feedback from a lot of people that live in sort of smaller areas it's difficult to try and learn when you live outside of these cities. Because if you are not able to see these live or find a mentor or attend these live in-person sessions, it
Mhm.
can be hard to get training. And a lot of people that live outside of these major cities rely on the recorded training. But I can totally
Mhm.
understand the official versus I can't record this for communication reasons. I do think that's really awesome that they are constantly doing live training while they're
Mhm.
updating. I do see a ton of companies pushing out software updates, but not necessarily keeping up the training. They may do 1 or 2 minute software videos, but they're not necessarily doing training. And I think that's somewhere where Blackmagic is doing an amazing job, where they
Yeah.
are keeping the training up with their software. That's software development and how quickly it moves. On that mark, a new version of DaVinci Resolve just dropped last night, if I'm not
Yeah.
mistaken.
Yeah.
One of the things that I wanted to ask you about outside of your training work is some of your professional work. So you're a colorist, you're a compositor. Tell me about a project that you've really had fun working on recently.
So yeah, I'd say about 50-50. Like I split my time between training and doing practical work. Maybe some years it's more like 60-40, more towards training because obviously the book does take a long time every version. I have a pretty wide like cast of clients and project types, which I really like because it means it's quite varied. I do a lot of consultation work, so people will talk about like, setting up pipelines in their studios. So help make sure that's all running correctly, or just like project workflow advising. So again, they'll tell me like what they're shooting on, what software they're using, what their vendors are using, and then I could advise like the formats that they should be using and workflows and all that, which I really like, because it feels like you're sort of housekeeping for them, like tidying up their workflow before it starts. Maybe like some of the biggest things I was involved with was with Disney Plus. I worked on a few feature films that they were producing. So I was kind of like back to back between 2019 and maybe 22, something like that. So I kind of started specializing in like American sports movies, which I didn't think I would, but yeah, it was the producer I was working for. That was his specialty. Yeah.
I noticed that actually, and I was gonna
Mhm.
ask you how you got involved with that and what your
Yeah.
role was on those.
Yeah, so I'm credited as a post-tech engineer.
Real quick, so which movies were these?
These were movie Safety and Rise.
Okay.
Yeah, and these are both biopics, right? So based on true stories.
All on Disney Plus, by the way.
All on Disney Plus, yeah, produced by Doug Jones, not the actor, by the producer, who got the same name. So with Safety, they wanted to do like a completely like all around DaVinci Resolve pipeline workflow, right? And this had not been attempted by a production of that size before, right? So they wanted everything from dailies and ingestion to obviously editing, right? Assistant editing, and then even like temp VFX and audio up to final deliverables. And Doug Jones like very strongly believed in the DaVinci Resolve like as the software of the future, the one that's going to pull off, entire features. So this was kind of like a proof of concept. And this was actually around about the time that collaborative mode had first been introduced, at least like on a server level. So we got to really like try it out for real and found like where, we sort of encountered like bottlenecks, all those sort of things, like actually seeing it in action. I think I was on the phone with Singapore like every single day and night rather for like 2 weeks straight, just reporting back to them going like, okay, well, we need to like, optimize this and we need to do that. But it was really great. Eventually led to a lot of the changes in DaVinci Resolve 17, and then also the ones that we see nowadays with like the cloud workflow as well. And then what's great about the next film, Rise, is that not only did we have the same workflow, right, end to end, but then on top of that, the cameras were all Blackmagic as well. And that was done with a blind test, right? They did a whole bunch of like test shots of the actors' costumes. And then the director chose the Blackmagic footage just based on.
With no producer input. He chose blind.
Yeah, it was a blind test. So it chose
Wow.
Black cameras
That's a
for the
lot.
production. Yeah, yeah. So then it was truly like a Blackmagic production all around.
So how was that second production? Because honestly, I've done quite a bit of reporting on the first software workflow test for Adobe Premiere when it was done for David Fincher's productions. And I mean, they're all disasters. It's always very rough the first time. But how is that second feature? Because that's the real test.
Well, so for the second feature, I wasn't around as long, so I was only there for a couple of weeks as consultation, whereas the first feature was about like 11 months. It was kind of funny actually, and I'm not sure if you you want to include this in the podcast because one of the assistant editors was like very anti DaVinci Resolve, and it was kind of like a lot of pushback from them, and he was basically announced that they were going to switch to Avid as like pretty much as soon as I was gone. And I think they eventually did. I think it was finished in Avid, even though they did so much of it in Resolve, which is just a shame. But yeah, what are you gonna do, right? Like you kind of do
Yeah,
need
I
to have
mean that
everyone on board.
happens.
Yeah.
It's interesting to know, and that is the way that a lot of productions work, that you can try to have as much input as you can. And obviously
Mhm.
we work in a very Avid centric world. That's how most productions we do work, is they are cut and offline in Avid, very occasionally
Okay.
Premiere, and then we finish them in Resolve. And that's the way
Mhm.
that assistant editors and editors, and they've been trained for decades. So it doesn't surprise me. Change is
Mhm.
hard. It is very, very difficult to move an entire production over to DaVinci Resolve.
Yeah.
And it is very appetizing for producers, but very difficult for the actual production to do, because it looks good on paper and it
Mhm.
looks good on the spreadsheets, but it actually in practice requires significantly more work from the people that are working,
Yeah.
potentially requiring more money. So it really is, that first production is a test, both for the test and is it going to, on the dollars, work out to be okay. In the second production, it's clear that the producers and the editors weren't on the same team. And so there was some conflict here. To have production do a transition over this, I believe it requires complete buy-in on both teams.
Yeah.
And if you don't, you are going to have conflict.
I completely agree about like there has to be a buy-in from everyone involved, especially like when it comes to transitioning like to a different application. That's going to be super uncomfortable for some people. We had complete buy-in from the producer and even the lead editor. So it was the assistant editor who pretty much derailed it at the end. But since then, like there have been more productions done, in DaVinci Resolve. So I know it is just onwards and upwards. We learned a lot from both of those.
I think it is on the training front. I think you're doing an excellent job on everything that can be provided to help make it a easier starting ground. But I think that's an excellent example of what happens quite a bit when you try and push the entire production into DaVinci Resolve and don't quite expect that. Let's move on to another project. Tell me about another project that you've worked on.
Last year, I had a director reach out to me about a film that he produced in the early 90s. I think it was about, I want to say 91, 92. This was made for broadcast. It was in Hawaii. And he wanted to sort of preserve it for posterity, right? So he wanted to submit it to like the Hawaiian University, like into their archives. He wanted to upscale it to 4K. I really enjoy restoration projects, but he was really interested in like the AI aspect of it as well. Like
Mhm.
AI upscaling. At first, I actually said no a couple of times because I was like, well, I've not worked with AI before, and like here's an application that you could possibly use. It was like Topaz,
Yep.
it's pretty good, and I was like, this sounds like a really great project, but unfortunately, I like the skill set to do this. He kind of wrote back and he didn't take no for an answer, and he's like, well, all right, what if you take the time to learn it, and he offered to buy the software, he offered to give me time to do trial and error, which is like the best thing you could possibly ask for as a creative, is just to not have to pretend to know something you don't, not to be rushed, so just take your time with the project. It's called Anahola, and that's I've already submitted it last year, and he was very pleased with it. Also, like, got to figure out a lot of things along the way, which was really exciting, because then you produce something that's just really clean that you're really proud of. So one thing that I never got to work with was color bars, but like on the receiving end, because those were baked right into the tape, right?
Oh
You
yeah,
would
this is a
see
inner. This is what I assume is, it was a film or like interlace SD.
interlaced, yeah, NTSC. I suspect it was actually capture in Betacam, and then it got
Okay.
digitized, yeah, to DVCam. And yeah, so I was just looking at these color bars, and I'm like, huh, like, well, I could just adjust the color bars and match what audiences in the 90s would have seen on their television sets. So that was a really good starting point, because you got to do, again, like display referred color management. But then I got to kind of work on the footage on top of that, like zhuzh it up a bit, and correct like for overexposure, that kind of stuff, bring out details in the shadows. So it was a really satisfying project to work on, and, completely different from anything I'd ever done.
Just to confirm some of the details. So this was a SD interlace project. You ran it through Topaz, correct?
Mhm. Yeah.
And then you color corrected in DaVinci Resolve.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. Topaz is, for those who are unfamiliar, is a really, really impressive program. They just came out with a professional version for those who are unfamiliar. A little bit expensive, but really, really powerful program if you take the time to learn it. You can get some amazing results, especially if you pipe the result back into DaVinci Resolve like Daria did and continue your color correction. So don't just try and throw it into Topaz and hit one button and expect it to be finished. But tell me a little bit more about this. So you essentially created like a one pass correction based off the color bars, and then you did additional color correction on a clip by clip basis.
Yeah. Yeah. So node 1 was just a color bar adjustment. Yeah.
So what were you using Topaz for? I assume for upscaling and interlacing?
I think I did that in Resolve. It was just for upscaling. No, actually, no, I would have been doing deinterlacing because obviously Topaz builds detail. Just scaling it up from what would have been like 480 by 576, something like that. But yeah, scaled it up to 4K, which is a pretty massive factor. The funny thing is, though, when I first, I sent the test shots to the director and I said, okay, this is what it's going to look like at 4K. I think it really took him aback how detailed everything became, and especially I think the wrinkles on people's faces really knocked him back a bit. So he wrote back and he's like, well, can we maybe soften it so it looks a little more like the original footage? So I ended up having to sort of create a 50-50 blend of the original footage with the Topaz upscaling.
I was going to ask you, I frequently had that issue where in its attempt to add detail, it can add a little bit more detail. What was your method of sort of mixing it? Did you sort of mix it back within Topaz, or did you sort of mix it back with the original footage within Resolve?
I created 2 presets in Topaz because I realized that I was getting better results depending on the content and the motion within the shot. So it would deal better sometimes with fast-moving objects or motion blur versus dealing with human faces, talking directly to camera. I pretty much created 2 versions of every clip, and then I reassembled the timeline, and then I sort of toggled between them, and I'm like, okay, which is the better AI version? This or that, this or that, this or that. And then I combined those with the original footage that had been super scaled in DaVinci Resolve to 4K. Then you kind of end up, with a little Frankenstein. And that was what he was most happy with. He's like, yeah, it still has that feel of the original footage, but it has that extra kind of detail, that oomph.
So this reminds me of almost of the Criterion process, because they use a combination of neat video and they pick and choose parts of the scene where they want to denoise. We want the original here. This sounds really similar. But one thing I have to ask you, what speed computer do you have? Because if I'm understanding this correctly, you have 3 different denoise versions for this.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I suppose after it's out of Topaz, it is rendered. So it's...
Oh yeah, it's just clips then.
It'll just be ProRes clips. I'm on a PC. I'm a 4070 Ti graphics card, and it runs the green. So can't complain.
Pretty quick then. One of the things that I want to point out, this was not an automated process in any way, shape, or form. This required artists' intervention on every single step.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, every single shot.
A lot of people are a little bit concerned about AI taking away their job or giving them less to do. What are your thoughts on that, having literally just completed a job?
I feel like I'm starting to hear this distinction, right, between AI versus AI utility, tools that help us versus just things that are trying to replace us. I'm very much pro-utility AI, so things like, the new denoise tool in DaVinci Resolve.
Ultra noise reduction, is that
Ultra NR, that's it. That's the one. That's great. IntelliTrack, again, that's AI driven. Magic Mask. None of those things are going to replace us because they're tools that need to still be used. In that sense, I am very hopeful. In my experience so far, seeing AI, you still have to know how to implement certain things. I used AI to write a bit of code for me once, a while ago, and I just didn't know how to run it properly. I still needed to learn how to QC it, and how to write the right headers for it, and you still need developers to do all that stuff. So I don't think it's fully. Yeah.
I'm going to ask what may be, I'll call it a stupid question, but I think it's important for me to ask it. The job that you just did for this client with Topaz and superscaling, do you think that this took you less time using all the AI tools or more time if you had to just do everything manually using, let's say, upscaling it previously? Because I think based off everything that I heard you spent more time using all the AI tools than if we did this a couple years ago. Obviously, we didn't have some of the technology we did, but I think you would have got it done faster a couple of years ago, but now you're spending more time sort of micromanaging these different AI tasks, but you're getting a better result.
That's exactly right what you've said. if I wasn't using Topaz, it absolutely would have taken a lot less time, but produced a very different result. Yeah.
That's what I'm hearing from a bunch of different people that are using AI. And the way that I'm hearing from you is the fact that we are spending a little bit more time, but when you're using it professionally in a way that you can pick and choose the results, you can essentially art direct AI in a neat way.
Absolutely. Not just me, but many people before me have said that AI is just about wielding the tool correctly. And you can wield it well, or you can, wield it poorly. So it really comes down to the user.
And in this example that we were just talked about, you clearly have wielded it very well and allowed yourself the control in there to choose, do I want to use Topaz? Do I want to use a specific aspect of Topaz? Or do I want to just go back and use the original footage with DaVinci's Superscale? So that to me is a very masterful use of AI while allowing yourself the control that you need to address your client's problem, which is this is too sharp or too soft. So masterful work right there.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
As we are starting to get to the end of our podcast, I want to make sure that everybody listening can find you, if they haven't already, online and where they can learn more about you. So if we wanted to follow you online and learn more about you, where can we follow you?
I'm not very good with social media. You need time to do those things, and I'm often trying to keep up with deadlines as it is. But I have been thinking of running my own workshop sometime in the near future. I've been doing a lot of stuff recently that I've been finding really, really exciting. But I've also been doing a lot of historical research. I've been writing a thesis last couple of months about the entomology of film terms, finding out why we call it lift gamma gain, that kind of stuff. I've always wanted to do a workshop that really focused on film analysis, just watching movie scenes and talking about, what we can learn from the colors. So I did sort of snippets of that on Casey Ferris's ResolveCon this year. So if you at all find that interesting, I have a mailing list that's going around right now. I am on socials, but I don't know how active I am, but you can find me on Facebook and Instagram.
Fantastic. Well, I'll make sure to share that list to your mailing list along with your YouTube channel and the rest of your socials in our show notes. Daria, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a true pleasure to talk with you on the show. Thank you again for coming on. And for this episode of Color and Coffee, I'm Jason Bodak. And until the next episode, have a great day and happy grading. And that's a wrap. Be sure to follow us on Instagram, YouTube, and your podcast app of choice. Search for @Color&Coffee or @Color&Coffee Podcast and join the conversation. If you're using Spotify or Apple Podcast, please leave a review. Huge thanks to FSI and Pixel Tools for sponsoring the show. Until the next episode,